So my colleague this morning covered kind of what Splunk is. Anybody not see that session this morning? Okay, you no.
It's too early.
So I need to go over it again, what Splunk is. We'll go, well, you'll figure it out as we go. We've got plenty of time.
It's an awesome masterclass. You're right. Just there you go.
Yeah.
See you later.
Figure it out. All right. So, my first bullet point was going to be what is Splunk, but now, I was like, I'll just strike that since we kind of went over that this morning, but I'll talk about it again. Actually, we'll trade over to a different slideshow that is Splunk. How about that? We'll do PTech Unix. That has what Splunk is. Same thing. All right. So I'll kind of glaze over this one real quick to do the what is Splunk thing. Okay. Once we get up and going. Okay, what is Splunk? All right. So obviously you're curious about Splunk if you're in this room. So the official, you cannot see that at all. I can see it, but you can't. The official definition of Splunk is it's the engine for machine data. And so what that means is there's a lot of systems in an enterprise that generate what we call machine data. Now machine data is just really unstructured, time-based data. So you have lots of core IT in the middle that actually has a circle around it, but you just can't see it on the projector. So you have core IT, you have servers and network devices and all these things that are generating log files and messages, and they're generating data that's useful to a company, but largely untapped. And so what the idea of Splunk is really, Christian explained it very well this morning, that the same premise behind a web search engine is a search engine will go out there and index web pages, right? And so when it's time for you to go find what you want, you have a search, basically some kind of engine that allows you to go search all that index data. That's the idea of what Splunk is doing to machine data. So all these things that are producing data that's really valuable are largely going untapped in the enterprise. If you're trying to troubleshoot a problem, mostly it's when people go look at log files or go try to dig into APIs or whatever. So they'll go look and trying to read these things just by parsing them by hand and reading through it is very, very terse and very hard to do. And especially when you're trying to make correlations from one system to another system, it's very, very hard to do. So that's the idea behind Splunk. We just make it easy where you type in a search term and it shows you everything that has this term. And then we have these set of search commands that allow you to drill down into your data and make pretty graphs and things out of your data. So not only for troubleshooting purposes, but also for really getting into like executive dashboards where it's saying here's revenue being generated from a website, or here's the usage of an environment, or if you want to see just overall usage as well as troubleshooting, and then as well as alerting. So you can set up, if you go to Google, you can set up some search and say alert me if this returns anything. Same thing as Splunk. You can say set up this search. If this ever returns something, let me know via, or run a script, or RSS, or email, or SMS, all that kind of good stuff. Splunk will do that as well. These are just some standard things that's really fast growing, and then the value is largely untapped from this machine data because it's just really hard to process without some kind of tool. Now, the difference between machine data and other types of data, you have relational databases that you think SQL, like Microsoft SQL or Oracle, things like this. It has an upfront schema. And so if you're trying, and a schema is just like, here's your tables and here's the fields that are in the table, and so as data is coming in, it's really rigid on how it comes in. Machine data, and especially Splunk machine data, can't be structured up front because Splunk doesn't care what kind of data comes in. It doesn't even know what kind of data is coming in the front end. It can just take anything, as long as it has a date and time stamp at the front and data after it, then Splunk will ingest that, index it, and make it searchable for you. So we can't do relational databases. Now, multi-dimensional database, that's when you start doing OLAP cube, and a lot of when you're trying to do a lot of really complex searches. A lot of people that do like city planning will use OLAP databases where they'll see, they'll start bringing in like stop signs and red lights and traffic processing, and a lot of that will be in like an OLAP type database. And then we have the machine data over here. What we're doing is unstructured, is really time-based, and most of your IT systems are producing machine data. So that's where Splunk plays over there. We don't play in these spaces. That's in the slide. We'll cover this again in the slide when we talk about installing Splunk. One thing I will point out, you probably won't be able to do it here, but there's a free download if you go to splunk.com. Up in the right-hand corner that says free download. This is what we call the freemium version of Splunk, meaning Splunk's license on how much data comes into what we call an indexer in a day. Since we don't know what kind of data is coming in, we don't care what kind of data is coming in, really the only way to license it is volume of data coming in, because you can send any kind of data to Splunk. So there's a free download, and the free part of it is actually, you start out with a full premium license. You can send it, you can send everything data to Splunk, and there's no limits at all. Then after a certain amount of time, you get you can convert to what's called perpetual free license, which allows you to index 500 megs of data a day. And we're talking 500 megs of text data. So if you have like somebody that's running 5 servers in that farm and all they're getting is session information and things like that, it could be 500 megs forever. There are some of our customers that are using the free version forever. Or if you get above that, then you start getting into a paid license. All right. We're going to cover that in the other slides, cover that in the other slides, and that. And that's just a marketing slide. Okay. And that. I think we're covering the rest of this. So here's a couple of good summary points. All right, so one thing about Splunk is there's no infrastructure requirements. What you download from the web is all you need, and it runs on just about anything. I'm running Splunk on my Mac right here. We're running it on Linux machines in San Francisco. We're running it on Windows machines. As far as the infrastructure piece of it, or the Splunk binary executable. So we're indexing everything. But where Splunk's running, which is what we call indexers and search heads and all that, we'll go over that in a minute, that's all can run on HP, UX, Linux, Windows, Mac, whatever. So you just install that, and then you have it scaled out also. So as you need more, you can just kind of scale out in almost a grid architecture if you need more horsepower. And then I say it's a platform for creating solutions, because I really think of Splunk as a data platform. So it gathers a lot of stuff, and as you'll see, the default user experience out of the box is almost like, I don't know what to do here. So that's why we're having the class here. And so I kind of relate it to, like, the first time I ever opened up Adobe Photoshop, I'm like, okay, what do I do now? I've heard this is really powerful, but I don't know what to do. So it's kind of Splunk that, like, I didn't know what Splunk was until I joined Splunk in January. Brandon got me to come over, and he did some good talking to get me joining without knowing what it did. So it's a good decision, I think, Brandon, for that, though. So anyway, I installed it on my Windows machine on Windows 7 at the time, and I installed it, and I was like, installed it, all right, and installed, and if you guys are installing it now, and then it comes up with it's a web-based screen. You go to the web-based screen, and I'm like, what do I do now? I don't understand what's going on here. So hopefully you will understand what's going on here when we're done. Okay. Oh yeah, here we go. And because the SMS passcode guys are in here.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks.
I actually was talking to David at PTech in Munich, and he said, "Oh, I want to say your name. I always say you're Jacob, but I know that's wrong. How do you pronounce your name?"
This is Jacob.
Jacob. Okay. I always say Jacob. Okay. He said, "Oh, look what he did. He just downloaded Splunk, and you can't see it on the screenshot, but there's a dot there, and a dot there, and a dot there, and all these little dots. So." He just picked up Splunk. You're here. Tell me what you did.
I got a new updated version.
Oh, you got a new updated version?
Real live production environment of one of our larger customers.
You want to plug it up?
Yeah, you can do that if you want.
Yeah. So what you?
I'm showing you later, actually.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're in the room. So you just.
One of the biggest truck companies in the world, DSV.
Yeah.
At least here in Europe, they're using it to see if it's a regular pattern going on, if they don't have illegal attempts from countries where they don't suspect activity. It's raising a lot. So they're using it in production.
Yeah, so using Splunk, you just picked it up and started making a Google map with plugging in the SMS passcode log data that you
are. It's easy to import all these logs, and
right.
you should make some field extractions to get the right field output.
Yeah, and then put it on a map and you're good to go, drill down, all that kind of good stuff as well. So, which is an important point right now about Splunk is its forte is really about making sense of data. Now that data is produced not by Splunk. So some of the stuff we're going to get into with the Citrix environments, there are things for like farm sizes and sessions and all this kind of stuff. That stuff is not in a log file somewhere, right? So we had to go grab that information. We're using PowerShell for ZNAP 6 and above and MFCOM for 5 and below to grab some data, and that's called, we're using scripts to grab that versus there's a log file sitting somewhere. So getting data into Splunk, which we'll talk about, that's actually their second bullet point on the class here. The thing about it is Splunk doesn't produce data, right? So that point will be more prevalent as we get along. So we're really forte in getting data that's already there and doing something with it. And that's also why Helga's here, because he has a really cool Uber agent that produces a ton of data that Splunk is able to do some cool things with as well. Okay. And also, by the way, this slide has been in my deck ever since PTech, so it's been at Brightform, it's been at Synergy, it's been about 4 different presentations, by the way. So.
Thanks.
All right. Okay.
Thanks, Jason.
So back to
This has been in my slide deck
Oh yeah?
ever since as well.
Right on.
So,
Okay, so that's kind of what Splunk is on a high level. So since I struck that bullet point, now we'll start with the installing Splunk. All right, so like I said earlier, Splunk installs on pretty much anything. You know, I'm running it on Mac, I'm running it on Windows, we're running on Linux, FreeBSD, Sun, AIX. You can install it, it's the same executable. And also you'll notice if you're a Windows administrator, which I was before joining Splunk, everything's very Unixy because it's really started in that world. So there's some GUI on editing this, which we'll go over, but a lot of it is still manually editing text files. They're called .conf files. So that may be, I don't know, a turn on to some people. Okay. So when you install Splunk, there's 4 main roles in Splunk. When you just install it on your workstation, everything is in one. If you think of it like a Citrix ZNAP server, you can install ZNAP and it has everything. It has web interface, it has the data collector, it has, you know, its application server itself. It can all be one thing. Or you can split it out into different roles depending on the size of your environment. So if you're installing this USB stick that Andy's passing around, you're going to basically install everything as one piece. But you can break it out. So we have what's called here the search head. That's the top, that's what's running the web interface piece of it. And then you have this indexing and search service. There's no user interface to the indexing. And you can think of indexing, you can think of it, we call a Splunk indexer, you can think of that almost like a database server. It's not really a database, it's not using SQL, we are not using NoSQL, is what I'm trying to think. Because that was a question, it's like, are you using NoSQL? And say, yes, we're not using SQL, but NoSQL is a database engine as well. We're not using NoSQL. It's all just flat text files on one there. So, because I came from a database world, I think of an indexer as a database server, and then we have indexes. And I think of those as databases, but they're not databases because there's no schema or any structure or anything to it. But that's how I have to think about it in my head. And then we have this what we call deployment server. Remember I said that it's very Unixy and there's some things that have no user interface. Unfortunately, that deployment server has no user interface at all. It's all modifying files by hand. So there's some improvements coming to that one. And then we have this collection, which you can think of these as agents that we have to go put out on machines to collect data and forward it over to Splunk. And so this green bar at the bottom just says all of this can be one role, or if you just need to split out more search heads, because a lot of people are doing searches, you can have multiple search heads or multiple indexers or multiple deployment, all that kind of good stuff, which we go here, we talk about this. So in the simplest form, you have Splunk there, and you have these forwarders forwarding data. So a forwarder is, and like I said, it's an agent. So So if you have Windows, you're going to put an agent on the Windows box, and it's going to collect data and send it to a Splunk instance or a Splunk indexer or a bunch of indexers. Then you have a Linux guy going over here and a Solaris guy going over here, sending this data to Splunk. Now, when you download that version of Splunk and you put it on, if you're just trying it out with a workstation, which most people do, you can have it remotely go grab information from a Windows machine, or remotely go grab information from a Linux machine, or just grab information about the machine it's on. So if you have Windows, you can say install Splunk and start indexing. So if you have some log files on there, or get some information from the registry, or get some information from perfmon or WMI on the local machine, you can do that. So index, universal forwarders push data to Splunk. You can't have Splunk go remotely grab data, even from a file share if you want to do that. So you can do that as well. For the most part, in most enterprise environments, you'll have what we call a universal forwarder on a machine that's forwarding information over to Splunk. So like I said, the same binary that you're downloading is the same one. So if somebody's using just a free version, or somebody's doing terabytes a day, which we have a client doing over 100 terabytes a day of text data coming into Splunk, they are scaling things out. So what we have here, it's hard to see the text from what you have here at the top. That's a search head going to multiple Splunk indexes, and then there's multiple universal forwarders sending its data, and all the arrows are kind of going everywhere, so all this crosshatch. So the Splunk indexes are what we call, you can think of it almost like I think of it as a RAID 5 array. So if you lose one, you're still in business. So you can, we have 3 there. If you lost one, you're still fine. Actually, you can lose both of those there, and you're still fine as long as you have one up and going, depending on when you lost both of them. And so you can scale out inside a data center that way. Oh yeah, the bullet point up to the top right, it says we use something called MapReduce. MapReduce is actually something that was patented by Google. And the way I think about this is MapReduce is almost like a multi-threaded process. When it's time to run a search, so when this person is doing a search, the search head sends the actual search out to the indexers. It says, here's the search, and the indexers will break that up and start returning pieces of it, and then it gets assembled back up to the search head. So if you think about a multi-threaded process, an application is going to spawn off multiple threads, and they're asynchronous, and they'll return their work. So the worker returns what it did in asynchronously of the actual application itself. So that's kind of what MapReduce does right there. So that's a Google thing.
Isn't Hadoop the open source version of MapReduce?
MapReduce is already open source. Now Hadoop file system is a clustered file system that is really, have you guys heard of Hadoop before? No? Just you? Yeah.
Really?
Me either before I started working for Splunk. So
Right.
I know what Hadoop is now. Yeah. Hadoop is the guy, the yellow elephant mascot kind of guy. Kind of like the penguin for Linux, yellow elephant for Hadoop. Hadoop is an open source file system. It's a clustered file system. And a lot of people do big data backend on Hadoop. And when Hadoop was first coming out, I guess when I first started Splunk, that's the first time I heard of Hadoop. There's talk of Hadoop being competitive to Splunk on its storage. But Hadoop and Splunk teamed up, and actually you can use Hadoop as a backend storage for Splunk, or you can actually use Hadoop as, you can store information in Hadoop and have Splunk go and visualize that data as well. So we tried to team up with Hadoop versus being seen as competitive to Hadoop.
Because it's a different thing.
Yes, overall it's a different thing, but the storage of the data, like Splunk stores its data, when you send data to Splunk, it's actually storing it on file, on disk. So when it's going to index data, unlike Google is just kind of keeping up of pointers of things, whereas in Splunk, when you send the log files to Splunk or you send the output of script to Splunk, we're storing it on the server, right? Hadoop is really good at storing that and then scaling out like we're showing here. So on the storage piece of it, Hadoop competes there, but we can go and actually run searches against the Hadoop file system and actually you store your stuff in Hadoop. So we have Hadoop connectors to allow you to do that. Makes sense?
Yep.
Since you're the only one that heard of Hadoop.
Yep, thank you.
And then, so, and this one, it's hard to see, this says New York, Tokyo, London. So these are, you know, if somebody is really a large enterprise, there's a big cluster of Splunk in each of one of these geos. And then actually, because of the way Splunk is built from the ground up on being almost like a grid architecture, you can search across all of those from a centralized location. So there's the headquarter guy up there at the top, and he's running searches that is hitting all of those. And because of MapReduce, he's able to go to all of these, and then those break out, and those break out, and those break out, and bring back terabytes of data. You're searching through terabytes of data, and being able to do that relatively quickly. And we just went over that slide a minute ago. Okay, so that's about installing Splunk. Trying to think of anything else as far as installing. Do you have any, I mean, I've done this for a while. You've just recently installed Splunk. Do you have any other input, feedback on what you've run into? And be, like I've had this conversation with you also, be brutally honest, because I want you guys to, you know, feel, you know, have a
so yeah, in setting it up, yes, you don't need any data back end. You don't need to set SQL up, or NoSQL, or any other type of database. But there is a storage requirement
Yes.
for your indexes.
yes.
So there is planning.
Oh, yes.
Where you're going to put all of that in. So when you first look at it, we don't need no database. Sounds brilliant. So you think, oh, I can use a relatively straightforward piece of kit in order to act as my search engine. But then when you actually look at it, the requirements for that can be large. So that's one thing. But another thing would be, it's a very different installation and configuration experience from any other tool that you've had previously.
Yes.
Or from a Windows admin perspective. So you're expecting, or quite often you're expecting an MSI, and I just proved that wrong, an MSI file that you just install. That's relatively straightforward.
Yes,
it's the deployment and then management of all the configuration components. That is not straightforward. There's no flashy GUI for that.
Right.
It's a set of text files, and quite quickly you can get into modifying configuration files, modifying text files in order to get stuff to work.
Right.
And it's not particularly helpful if you've done something wrong. So finding out why stuff isn't reporting back, and if you look at the support base, knowledge base, Splunk base, there's lots of people going, I've set it up and I'm getting no data. So it's a common problem.
Right.
So it is easy to install, you don't need all the database stuff, but it's not necessarily straightforward and simple.
Yes.
And you can get lost.
Right. I agree with you on that, from coming from a Windows background. And yeah, I totally agree with you on that. Especially when we're going to cover here towards the end what's called an app. And so when you start setting up apps and trying to get data in, you're a lot of times modifying text files to get this stuff, to get data into Splunk. I'm glad you mentioned about the storage piece. Let's go back here. So I mentioned, you know, we are actually, when you send Splunk, we're storing it. I didn't mention this, so like Andy pointed out, you can get in trouble on how much data comes in. So we're actually storing all this data. Now, it's text data, and when it comes in, we're compressing it, and text data on a compression is gzip compression. It gets around a 90% compression ratio. But anything that the operating system can see, so whichever operating system you install it on, anything the operating system can see, Splunk can store that index files on. Now, we do have a concept of rolling the data as it ages, so you can set up what we call the hot, we call them buckets, a hot bucket, a cold, or a cold bucket, and hot, thawed, hot, warm, and cold, yeah. And then you can do something called thaw data, which is weird. All right, so you have a hot, a warm, and a cold bucket for information in your index. So you can say that I want hot data to be on, because it's going to say maybe 2 weeks or a month or something like that. That's what I'm going to search the most, and I want it to be really high performing. So maybe I put it on a RAID 10 array. And then as it rolls off into warm, maybe it goes to a RAID 5 or maybe a NAS device or something like that. And then cold could even be tape. So whatever the operating system sees, it can store the data there, right? So that's another architectural decision you have to make. But anytime you get beyond this instance right here, where you're doing more than one Splunk server, or you're scaling out more than the 500 meg, you really have to start thinking about what are my search heads going to be, what are the RAM and IOP requirements on there, the disk storage and things like that. All right, back to over here. All right, so talking about getting data into Splunk, which is the next hurdle. So, like I mentioned earlier, let's actually go out to the Splunk website. I'm running Splunk on my laptop here. Let's see if we can see it there. All right, so just real quick, the default experience when you install Splunk is actually not even that. That's actually kind of helpful. So that's not even what you get when you first install Splunk. All right, this is what you get when you first install Splunk. You install Splunk and you go to whatever your name of your machine is, and it asks you for the port when you're setting it up. By default, it's 8000. So whatever machine name, colon 8000, and this is what you get. And can you guys see that at all in the back? It's a little bit fuzzy.
Switch off the line, huh?
Whatever you need to do. So this is, you know, like I said, before I joined in Splunk, I thought, well, I guess I should check out what this thing's about. So I installed Splunk, and you know, it installed relatively easily. Like, you know, the MSI, there it is, we got it. And then I went to the web page and it says, here's what you get. And I'm like, that's great. What do I do with this? You know? And so what you have to do is you have to add data, right? So this is how getting data into Splunk. So fortunately, when you first install Splunk, Splunk gathers information about itself. So by default, just by installing Splunk, you have some information, but it's not readily available where it is. You have to know what index it's installed, where it's going to go see that information. So you have this add data, because you have to get data in, and then you have this thing called launch search app. Now, Splunk is a data platform, and it's a data platform for applications. And so there's one that comes with Splunk right here called Search. So this is actually an app right here. So if you launch Search app, that's the one that gives you the search bar, kind of like Google, and you can start searching your data. And like I said, some data is already coming in because Splunk's indexing itself. But before, if you want to get any useful enterprise data, you've got to get information into your environment. So how do you do that? The way you do that is you come over here to Manager, and then you have this data inputs. And so by default, these are the things that are coming in just on this machine. So right here we have some information coming in, and this is actually, well, these are some other apps. So this internal thing right here is collecting information about itself. And then there's another index called Audit that is connecting information about itself. But here's all the stuff that's coming into Splunk. Some of these are log files that I have locally for, this is a demo, this is a demo. I have some NetApp generated data here. So I have that a log file actually on this machine. And then this default app, those are some things where it's looking at itself to say, this says vars full Splunk, and this is stash new, so these are some default things. But if I need to get, now we're working on just a default install of Splunk and going and grabbing data remotely. So I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna go set up some new data to grab. This is where you can get me, where you can go pull in data. So this has this option of previewing data. You can import a log file if you have one, and you kind of see what it looks like. If you think about this, it's kind of like if you're doing an import of a CSV into Excel, and it gives you the preview before you actually open it up, so you can make sure it's getting what you need. But I'm going to skip that for right now. And so here's where you're actually telling Splunk what to do. All right. So this first option, it's kind of hard to see that these are radio buttons. I'm telling it what to do. It says I want to index data from a file or directory that this Splunk instance can access. So that's important, that this Splunk instance has to be able to access if it's doing remotely. So you can set up like a file or directory on this computer if you wanted to, or you can do a file share. Or you could do a remote machine if this Splunk instance can access it. Now, you can upload a file, that's what this second one is, where if I already have a log file and I just want to do some analysis on a log file using Splunk, I can upload that log file to this instance of Splunk, and then that's all you get. You're not going to get more data out of it, but I have a log file I can just import. And then I want to index a file from this Splunk server, where that's where I go and enter a path. Now, when you're indexing a file, it will keep up with where it is in the file. So every time it goes and looks at this file, whenever that file system changes, in Windows it's a change journal. So it's using journaling to go say, all right, there was a change, and figure out, I need to go see what the new stuff is. It can constantly pull that in. Then there's this button for some more settings. If I want to go to a different machine, and then you can tell it what kind of source type, which we'll get into source type and host in just a minute, and then which index to put it in right here. So by default, everything goes into the main index that Splunk is indexing, and then you have default as well. Just making sense so far?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is just a very basic data input that this actually does have a user interface. The only caveat that I've run into here is if you're doing a remote machine, making sure that it has data, it's actually much easier to set up a forwarder and forward data to Splunk rather than telling Splunk to go grab some data from a remote machine. Okay.
Say that bit again.
It's much easier to install a forwarder and have the forwarder send stuff to Splunk.
So what do you mean by install a forwarder?
A forwarder goes on a remote machine. Yeah, we're going to get into that. And we're going to look at this. A forwarder is an agent, basically.
Okay.
And then you tell the agent what to do locally on this machine and send it to Splunk.
Right.
So if I'm grabbing some WMI or perfmon or files or whatever, it just does it locally and then sends it to Splunk.
Potentially this is an interesting and different thing from some of the marketing that Splunk has in it. You don't need agents anymore, potentially, yeah, because you can just set up an indexer and you can pull all of the information in and you can review all of the information without having an agent on that end device.
Yes.
But architecturally, and especially for XenApp, for instance, you need to install a forwarder on those boxes in order to generate information and then send it back to your indexer, so that no agent in this goes, because you do need to put a forwarder on, so that forwarder is your agent. And granted, you can do some clever things, you automate the installation of that, that's all good, but it does need to be on there, and it will be generating data on that machine before it forwards it.
Well, you know marketing. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. You technically can get away with XenApp without installing a forwarder.
Yeah.
Because that is all remotely accessible too.
Yes.
But just because you can doesn't mean you should.
That's right.
All right. So that's if you want to set up a file in a directory. And also on directories, it can watch everything in a directory. So if there's multiple files in a directory, you can say, monitor this whole directory, and anything that pops in that directory, monitor. So that's a good thing for like web logs, because it names the web logs different things if it adds it. This TCP and UDP, these are actually listeners. So you can set up a listener on any kind of port. So if I want to go set up a TCP listener, and so on some kind of port that's unused in my environment, I can go set that up in my environment and then send data remotely from a machine to TCP. More often we're using UDP because, for instance, if you're doing syslog, you set up UDP 514, and then you can configure syslog just to remotely deliver information to Splunk. In that case, there is no agent at all. So we do this with Netscaler, for instance. So you go through Netscaler and I'll say, set up syslog to remotely deliver to a Splunk instance that's listening on port 514, or any port that you want to. But by doing it on 514, you don't have to make a port change. And then Splunk will just start grabbing that information as it's coming across the wire. So that's, and then script, we use a lot of scripts, mainly on forwarders, but you can have a script. And so what's cool about scripts is anything that would have come out on the screen, so standard out, will end up in the index. So you can write scripts that just says, here's the date and time that I ran, and here's some, some stuff afterwards. Normally, you can help Splunk out by saying, doing key value pairs like this equals this, this equals this, this equals this, and then whatever that output would have been on screen, goes into Splunk Indexer. So we're doing a lot of that with Hyper-V, Zen Server, Zen Apps, Zen Desktop, so on and so forth, and we'll show you those. Okay? So these are the main ways to get data into Splunk, and now this is all just on my local Splunk index. Remember that. We're going to look at forwarders in just a minute, which forwarders don't have a UI, unfortunately. So files and directories, individual file, an entire directory, TCP and UDP ports to listen to, or custom scripts to get information into Splunk. Making sense so far?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And this is also where you set up your forwarding and receiving. So if I wanted to forward information from this Splunk index to another one, but this is also where I'm already setting up to receive data. So here's, we already went over that, but the receiving is, I can set up that listener, and then I can configure the listener. I don't have it up here, but I can configure that listener TCP or UDP right here. So that kind of is another place to do the same thing, basically. And then also on system settings, if you're going to set up alerts to send out emails, I don't have my email set up here, but this is where you go set up your mail server to do your authentication to send out emails, and then you can use some templates. You'll see here this $name right here. So you have some variables that you can use to put in your templates as well. So you can do alerts via email, and also you can, when we start looking at the searches, you can schedule reports to get delivered on a periodic basis as well. So if you have some dashboard that are, you're supposed to deliver some report every Monday to your CIO or something like that, and you have it in Splunk, you just have Splunk automatically generate a PDF and forward it over there to them, and you just automated part of your job.
Once you've got the full version, the enterprise version, you can't do that for free.
True. Freemium, so there are some things you cannot do in free. Okay?
Which I list tomorrow. Should I be on time?
No. Should you be on time? You'll list tomorrow. All right, and then
I quite like the fact how much you beat yourself up about that. It saves everybody else.
Get in.
we all forgot about that. You're the
Yeah, I'm the one that's just let it go on. Move on.
right on. And this is where you set up your distributed search as well. Where if I want to go set up, multiple search heads and all this kind of jazz, where I can. This is a search head right here, but if I want to search on multiple Splunk servers at the same time to do that MapReduce thing, is where I go set all of those up as well, so you can do that. Okay? And so this is all in this, can't see this link up here, but it says manager right there. So this is where you start to go really configure your system. We'll talk about everything on the left-hand side a little bit later. But these are just really some of the basic things. Also, oh yeah, we'll talk about users and authentication. So you notice when I first pulled this up, I had to authenticate. By default, Splunk comes with its own authentication mechanism. And by default, the username is admin, and the password is change me. It'll actually tell you the password when you first log in, when you first pull it up the first time. Now you can go set up an LDAP communication. So if I want to authenticate via some other system like Active Directory, which is what we're doing at Splunk, when I go log in my Splunk instance at work, so that I actually go put in my Active Directory username and password using Helga's data. I'll pull it in that. Okay, looks like it's finally going. All right, so I actually go type in Active Directory at Splunk username and password, and there we go. That's the Splunk instance that's running in San Francisco, California. Okay. So, and also you'll notice that you can't see there, but it's using HTTPS with no, we changed it to use that with certificates and no. Of course, it's using 443 since we're doing HTTPS, so you can set up HTTPS if you want to. Okay. And then once you have your authentication, you have users, which I just have my one user because this is my local instance. And then you can set up actually roles on what these users can do, what types of searches they can do, what kind of data they can see. And then even if you allow them instant, you can restrict what fields they can see within the data. So here's some roles, you can make your own roles, and then when you go in to create your roles, you have the granular based access down here. So you can say, here's what they can actually do, the capabilities that this particular role can do right here, and I'm on the admin, so I can do a ton of it. So anyway, and then you can say, here's what the indexes that they can search and what they can do in that index as well. So you have some pretty granular user-based access going on here. Questions so far before we move on? Okay, that's getting data into Splunk via you telling Splunk to go grab something. Now I'm going to turn it around and say, install what's called a universal forwarder and tell that forwarder to go do something and send it to Splunk.
That head on the video, that's Helge Klein.
Oh.
You close almost half of the video with your hand.
Cut it off.
He's any chance.
Right on. So, you have a question?
Yeah. So, before we talk about forwarders, what's the limitations in receiving data? Why? So if you're trying to do stuff and you're receiving all this data, at what point will you say, actually, that's not good enough and I need a forwarder? What would make you say that?
Yeah, so one of the things about forwarders is, we're on a single Splunk instance right now, and it can go and grab some information. And so you're going to be limited on how much processing power that this Splunk index can go and do that. Plus, you're going to run into authentication issues probably. And then you're going to run into the whole, not really technical issue, but red tape issue of, I'm not going to allow you to go grab this piece of information off my computer, or I'm not going to put you in the domain admin group, or not domain admin group, but give you remote access to machines, things like this. So when you start, the things that you'll run into limitations and where it just really starts getting annoying, where you have to constantly trying to do stuff remotely over the wire. Because what's going to happen when you install a forwarder is going to do everything locally and then just send the data off. Versus if I'm on the Splunk server, if I need to run a script, I need to remotely execute that script. So that's going to be more, I guess, intensive on CPU and memory on the Splunk server, as well as what I'm doing across the wire. So it's quite easy to send data across the wire up to Splunk, but then say I want to go do, like if you're using PowerShell, and you have to go do this whole remote object execution with PowerShell, it's quite a bit to set up, because you have to go set up your key authentication and do Kerberos and all this kind of weird stuff. So it's just easier to set up a forwarder.
So basically it depends on the type of data, because if you're just using, say, Perfon or WMI, then that is, by definition, remote enabled, right?
Yes, yeah, but you had to put it into a certain group. This machine would have to belong to a certain context in AD to be able to do remote WMI. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
But once you set that up, then that should be fine forever.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But now you're using the indexer to query that information and processing on the server, whereas if you had a forwarding on, it's just one result. It's just the forward to do the work. So do you get your indexer to go off and request information?
So that's just where you assign your results, right? I mean, it's all taking up CPU cycles and memory somewhere.
Yeah, it is, absolutely, but it's not really about data, it's about where you want the processing. So it's not as if, once you get to 50 meg, then you need to have a forward. It's not that at all. It's not the quantity of data, it's where you want the processing.
You're going to spread it out on each individual machine with a forwarder. Send it all up to Splunk. But it works either way.
Yeah.
But it's really going to be how much are you doing. There's not a hard limit that Splunk says, once you do this, go to the forwarder. You're going to have to figure that out yourself, because I might be doing this script, this WMI, this perfmon, and all these types of things, where we could say, if you're just doing remote WMI, query 100 machines and cut off that. That's just the number I pulled out of the air. But if you're doing this script and WMI and remote registry and perfmon, then you're like, you can do 3, something like that. Again, just pulling something out of the air. So once I got past, I haven't really liked doing the remote thing other than basically file system. So I've just used forwarders because everything's in that local context. I don't have to think about all the remote stuff and the remote object access and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. Moving on. All right. So in that case, we'll move on to a universal forwarder. So when you go to Splunk, and like I said, there's the free download up here. When you go to free download, you have all these platforms that Splunk installs on, okay? There's Windows 32-bit and 64-bit, all kinds of flavors, XP 2003, Vista 7, 2008, 2008 R2, and Unix and all this. But when you install this, you have, where's the universal forwarder? So yeah, it's kind of buried, I remember. A little link right here says universal forwarder. This is the Splunk platform, what you're getting here. See, it's a platform. Well, actually, that's just the OS platform, but when you're downloading the Splunk platform here, okay? And then if you want to install a universal forwarder, you come up here and click this guy. And the universal forwarder goes on just as many versions of operating systems as the actual platform does itself. So, you know, if you're doing on, you know, this is actually for Windows, it's an MSI package. You can do remote installs of the Linux, and I have like CentOS doing Zen Server. So you can do those remote installs also. But so if you're doing a Windows package, which in this audience most people will be doing, this is just an MSI that you install. So you install the universal forwarder and it doesn't do anything. It just sits there. The only purpose of the universal forwarder is to, you tell it what to do, you tell it what to collect, and it forwards its data over to Splunk.
I assume it just runs as a service.
Yes, it runs as a service. Yeah, so it's a Windows service. And so what happens, so yeah, you go install this forwarder and nothing happens. When you go through the install process, you can click next, next, next. One of the things that it's going to ask you is like, do you have a deployment server? And you can say, here's my deployment server. Otherwise it says, where's your index or load balance index? You know, you can send the data there. So the thing about deployment server is a piece of Splunk that allows you to have a central place to tell your forwarders what to do. So you have all these universal forwarders out there. So you can use any kind of mechanism that you already have for software delivery, be it an Altiris or Active Directory or something like that, to get this forwarder on your machine, in a Windows machine, because it is an MSI and it has all the command line options to silently install. But like I said, once you install it, it doesn't do anything. It just sits there. Then you use deployment server from Splunk to tell the different forwarders what to do. So when you install this forwarder, you give it you tell it kind of what machine type this is, or what we call it machine class. So if I'm doing XenApp, I say here's my my XenApp server, or if I'm doing Active Directory servers, I can tell it this type of thing. When I set up my deployment server, again, deployment server has no user interface, so it's kind of it sounds easier than it is. I won't lie on that.
Yes.
Yes. You'll
Very,
agree.
very much. So when you read deployment server,
It
in
sounds
my
great.
mind, there was a little interface, and you could configure stuff, and then you read the book, and you find out that it's a configuration file, and you
Yes.
read it, and it's not an instance, it's not a separate download. It
Right.
is part of the thing that you just installed now.
Yes.
You configure a text file with the machine names in
Yep.
groups of stuff that you want to do.
Yep.
So it's a lot more involved than people would typically expect if you're used to deploying something with Alteryx or something with any other tool that you are more interested in using.
Beer break. 10:30.
Oh, come on, don't pretend you're shy.
Hey, over here.
Thank you. You don't deserve one, Andy, because you didn't give your session.
Andy, yours your 9 o'clock tomorrow.
It's 9 o'clock tomorrow.
Yes.
Because you know what?
It's
I'm
on
like
the
with time.
agenda. It's in our agenda on the website.
All right.
If you can please open the agenda.
Is that German 9?
You need to start thinking early so finish it.
Cheers.
Well, that's right.
Cheers.
I'll go get
Cheers.
one of the beers. I can drink one of the bottles. So.
It might be a bit warm.
Probably.
Yeah.
Are they?
All right.
I sold you one.
All right. So anyway, I'll tell it like it is. I'll tell it straight, and Andy will back me up on this. That deployment server in concept, it does what it says it does. It's just kind of a bear to set up. That is being worked on, fortunately.
Yeah.
Because what happens is deployment server is all configuration files. And so what happens on deployment server, you have this big file called serverclasses.conf. And that's where you define, all right, here's all my different types of servers I have. Here's my XenApp servers and my Active Directory servers and all that. And then here's what they get. And we call the thing that goes, the universal forwarder, the thing that we tell universal forwarder to do, we call it a technology add-on, a TA. So the universal forwarder will have one or more technology add-ons that tell it what to do. And so for XenApp, XenServer, XenDesktop, all those things, we have universal forwarder and then a TA that tells that universal forwarder what to do. Does that make sense? I mean, that's kind of a little bit different than a lot of these types of same.
Could you maybe show just an example in the
Yeah, I
file
was about
system?
to. I want to make sure that I made sense before I went on. Okay. So,
And you don't need the deployment server either.
you don't need the deployment server. No, you don't have to have the deployment server. If you have hundreds of universal forwarders out there, you could technically go hand edit all of them if you wanted to. The deployment server is just to make your life easier when you have a bunch of those out there. Okay,
Well,
so,
you can't be bothered to read all the documentation like some
Right.
people.
like some people.
All right, then I
Right.
couldn't be bothered to.
All right, so let's look at,
Because the apps are themselves just sets of text files, aren't they?
everything, all the apps are just anything that, so when we get into apps, and we have these pre-configured dashboards and searches and all those. An app is nothing that anybody that owns Splunk couldn't do themselves. We just did a whole lot of stuff for you already out of the box. So, all this stuff that I want to show you about XenApp and XenServer and Hyper-V and all this kind of stuff, anybody could have done themselves, but this is my full-time job now. So, most likely, there is a learning curve to learning the Splunk search language, and so my job is to do a lot of this stuff for you out of the box, where it may get you all the way there, or it may get you 90% of the way there, and if you want to go look, and apps themselves are all open source and free. They sit on top of Splunk, so you can go see how any of these apps are done, which is how I learned a lot of this stuff. All right, so what I'm looking at here, probably the app that we'll concentrate on for the most part is XenApp, and then what we call the server virtualization app, because the server virtualization app takes data from Hyper-V and XenServer and mashes it together in what's called a common information model, because they both have the concept of shared storage and host and VMs, and so we're able to bring all that data together and show you all that kind of stuff. So this is what we call, this is a TA Hyper-V 08 server. So this is what you would deploy, like you install a universal forwarder on Hyper-V, and then this is what would go in, into a company that universal forwarder. This is the TA, technology add-on, for Hyper-V. And this is what it looks like. Everything, all the directory structures in Splunk look the same. So you have this bin that you have put your binary files in. A default is what we as Splunk ship out of the box. If you want to make changes that don't get overwritten, you put your stuff in local. So if we release a new version of this TA for Hyper-V and you made your changes in default, they will get overwritten when we release a new version of it. So put your stuff in local. And then metadata is what all those access roles, so you have who can do what. So basically, what we really focus on is, I'll go into default, and what you would do when you set this up, since I said, if don't put your stuff in default, you'd make a copy of this inputs.conf and you would put it in local. Again, this is not very nice to tell people to do, which we're working on. So,
As an aside, I thought that was neat when I read that through.
well, it's neat, but I mean, to tell somebody, hey, go make a copy of this and then edit it, I would rather have you go set up, run a GUI on your machine to go set up stuff. But,
It would have been, yes. So what you do is you open the default file, and the
Yes.
default location for saving it is in local.
yes,
All of that would have been much neater.
yes, agreed. So this inputs.conf is what we as Splunk are giving you as suggested best practices to do. So this is what an inputs.conf file looks like. An inputs.conf file is we're telling the universal forwarder what to do. So when the universal forwarder starts up, it's going to look in its directory for all these TAs, And then this inputs is saying, this is what I want you to do. Whatever the result is, so this first thing it says, I want you to run this script called get VM detail. And we're saying whatever the output of that script is, send to Splunk, okay? So there's several things here. This is the TA for Hyper-V, so we're gonna get some information about the virtual machines, and this is how often to do it. Every 60 seconds, run that script. Whatever the output of that script is what ends up in the index. And then we tag it with some information here, the source type. That's the type of information that's coming. We tell it where to go. That's the server vert index, and we give it a source. Now the source and the source type are configurable by this inputs.conf, and that's just to help you with your searching. Every entity in Splunk has 3 types of information already. There's the host, the source, and the source type. So there's the source. You get to configure what it is. Normally we just say whatever. If you're a scripted input, we say that's the script. If it's a file, the source would be the file name. Then the source type, that just helps us in our searching later. It says hypervisor : Hyper-V : VM. So we're just saying that's a hypervisor that's type Hyper-V and it's a virtual machine. Then we say, go run this script every 60 seconds and tell me what you find.
Why is there in the square brackets dot path at the end?
Yeah, so this is very Unixy, right? So one of the things about this is I can't pass it a parameter, a command line parameter. The actual script that's going to do this is a PowerShell script, the .ps1 script. So I can't just tell it a PS1 script because by default the file type association for PS1 is Notepad. So if I ran this, it would just open Notepad if I put PS1 in there. So to get around that, very keen eye by the way, to get around that we do this .path. That's something that Splunk understands. So that is basically telling it a path to what actually to do, that I can put a command and a command line parameter. So there's a path to PowerShell with a script to run. So if I have command line parameters going into a script, I can't put it up there on that stanza right there with the square brackets. So we call those things in square bracket stanzas. So I can't put a command with a parameter in that stanza. So that's why I go to a path file and I have PowerShell and the PowerShell script to run. So it'll actually run it. You'll notice if I go open the Zen server one, there's no path file because I can just, it's using Python to run that scripts or Python scripts, and the OS can natively execute Python scripts. Even Windows can natively execute Python scripts because you can do the file type association with .py with the Python engine. But you would have to go change your file type association for .ps1 files on every server to PowerShell instead of Notepad. And they specifically did it with Notepad for security reasons.
So dot path, that's actually a file.
What's that?
So there's actually a file that's called
Yes.
getVMDetail.path.
Yes, there
Okay,
is.
yeah.
Make sense?
Yes, now
Yeah.
that's
Look at inside that.
Yeah, no, we'll get there. And so this is just everything. And like you said, most of our stuff right here for this type of thing are all scripts because there's not really a log file sitting on the Hyper-V server. If there was, we'd just go tag that. Now here when we get into perfmon, well, that's a little bit different. We're doing something different with that one. So over here if we're just grabbing event logs, there's not a script. We just say it's a win event log, and you tell it which event log, and then you can actually tell it which events to pull out of there. But right now we're just saying grab everything out of there. Same thing with system and security. And then these are specific event logs for Hyper-V. So we're saying look in the win event log and look for that in the event log, and so we can go grab that stuff as well. So again, this is modifiable. If you don't want to do all this stuff, you can take some of it out. If you want to add to it, no problem, just do it. This is what all that Splunk is doing when it pulls up. So to give you an idea of that, path
Can you alter that in real time? So if you change something on your deployment server, will it automatically happen on each of the TAs, or is there a job that you have to push it out, or is it every hour, or is it every...
Yeah, the deployment server is on a timed basis. It's somewhere around 10 or 15 minutes that it will pop over there. Or you can actually go tell it to reload and do it immediately. Kind of, you think of it like a GPO refresh, like you can say GPO update to do it now.
Yeah.
So same concept. All right, so what that path file looks like. So here is, we'll do the get VM detail. That path file right here is system root, system32, Windows PowerShell, v1.0, PowerShell.exe. And then dash command, and then here, this Splunk home environment variable, you don't have to set that as an environment variable on your machine. Anytime Splunk executes something, it understands Splunk home. You can set, if you're trying to run these scripts by hand, then without running it through Splunk, then you need to go set that environment variable. But Splunk already knows what that is. So Splunk home is just wherever Splunk is installed, and it puts all of its stuff in Etsy apps and then some thing right here. So this was TA, Hyper-V08 server, then PowerShell get VM detail, I think is what the end of that says. Yeah, get VM detail.ps1. So this is what that path file looks like. Only reason we're using a path file is because that stanza can't take parameters. You can take a script, and that's the only script it does, or you have to use a path file to do command line.
So basically, you could either start PowerShell.exe or start Notepad without that path file.
Yeah, you got it.
And if you're deploying the TA for Zenat 4.5, you have to learn all about the path files because you have to fix all the scripts as they're not.
Yeah.
Yes.
I take it, we have to run signed scripts.
Move on from that.
You'd have to re-sign these scripts potentially if you've got the signing to.
For PowerShell, yeah.
In the manual, though, it does say that you have to change the PowerShell execution policy. Which I found out later.
Well, you can change the PowerShell. I mean, if you're doing, if you can do remote sign. So if you're doing remote sign on PowerShell, this would be a local script. So there's no signing on that. If you're doing all sign, yeah, you got to redo that.
Or just butcher the policies. You know,
Okay. But I mean, if you do remote sign and this is running locally, then that's fine. Okay. All right. So that's what a path file looks like. And then if you're just curious what the PowerShell file looks like, again, this is all just, let's see, we'll think of that same one. So let's stick with that. So this is what the PowerShell looks like. We get the environment variable of the computer name, and then we have some helper functions right here, helper functions.ps1. Then we do some try catch to get, this is VM. So we need to get the stuff about the cluster, and then we just go for each VM, and this is all just PowerShell stuff here to grab stuff about. I mentioned earlier about using the common information model. We said, all right, we're going to call it an ID, we're going to call it a VM name, we're going to call it all this stuff. These fields is what the Splunk search uses. These fields right here, and they are not returned as those names in XenServer. And I'll show you about field aliases in a minute. So this is what a PowerShell script looks like. So we're telling the Hyper-V TA to go grab information about the VMs that are running on it. Okay? Does this make sense so far? How we're getting data in. This is more advanced TA getting stuff. So this is running on a forwarder. Whatever the output of that script is, send it to Splunk. Okay.
And just like the data, you can modify that script if you want to
Yes.
add to it.
Right. You can think of all of these as examples. I mean, they fully function.
Yes.
But all of this is, you can see all of it. This is what you get when you download the app for server virtualization, and you can go make changes to this all day long.
Yeah.
I do like that. I do like the fact that everything is just plain text files. It's
Oh, yeah.
great.
And so if we look at the same thing,
Well, what I found, early doors, it was, you could write TAs and then you could sell them, but you need to move away from that. Or these are all free.
these are all free, yeah. And so this is the same thing. So I mean, this is the collection for XenServer. And if you look at the inputs.conf on this one, you'll see that up here, you'll see the stanza here is just a Python file. We don't have to use a path file because both Windows and Linux understand .py, and they know to launch Python and launch that script, so it comes with file type association. So we don't have to do that weird, funky path stuff here. And so we're just doing the same thing. Says, all right, get information about the pool and the VMs, and if you want to see what, we're just doing the same thing. I chose Python on this versus PowerShell just because being Xen based, a lot of those people are used to Python versus trying to, and I didn't want to make PowerShell a requirement, so you can put this on. But here's what the Python script looks like for going and grabbing information about a Zen server virtual machine. And so all it does is it goes out and connects to the pool and loops through all the virtual machines in the pool, then writes out the stuff. And so this is just really at the very end, it prints whatever the variable out is. So I'm just keep on adding to the variable out, and it prints out. And so out ends up being a timestamp, as you can see here, a timestamp, and then a bunch of stuff after it. So name description equals that, name label equals that. So it's just a bunch of key value pairs that ends up at the very end. And so that's what ends up in the log. Make sense?
So this is your job now?
Yes. This is what I do all day long now.
You must count your IPO.
Yeah.
So, if I wanted to get some integration from Atlantis and Splunk, we will just
Copy that,
copy that.
and then just rename Hyper-V to be Atlantis.
Yes.
And then you're done.
Yeah.
Maybe put a comment in.
Written by.
Yeah. Just some grep command.
Yeah.
Easy, done, bosh. Hold me tight for tea.
Yeah.
Let me see, I was going to show you just to give you an idea. There we go. Gotta click on the thing.
Oh,
To
I
give
use
you an-
handbrake too, that's nice.
What's that?
I use handbrake too.
Oh, yeah?
That's nice.
I wasn't kidding about those video torrents. I don't have TV at home. Let's see. What I'm doing now is I just wanted to show the concept of, I can't remember the IP address of this thing. 89, okay. And 162.203.89. So what this is that I'm connecting to right now is the machine that I'm using to do collection on for Zen server, and so it's running all those Python scripts, and this will give you an idea of what the output looks like. All right, so good grief. A little slow. All right.
The other neat thing with them just being scripts is if you do have a problem, you can just run the scripts directly.
That's exactly what I do. Yeah, so when I have problems, I just come in here, and this is my troubleshooting methodology, that I go and run the script. So let's see, and we're in Vim. And all right, so I just say get VM .UI, I think that's it. All right, so probably VM wasn't the greatest thing because there's a ton of them. I probably should have done git host. But, all right, so that Python script I was showing you earlier, it starts out with, it's hard to see from the back of it, starts out with a date and timestamp right there, and then all that stuff I said, name description equals that, name label equals that, platform, all that jazz right there, and power state equals that, the UUID. So this is just key, and here's another timestamp. So this is every run of the script, I mean every iteration of that loop. Here's the iteration, here's one, and so on. So that's the output of the TA. It runs that script, and that ends up in the Splunk index. So if we go look at that, I'll stay local for this part to make it faster because I have the data generator on here. So if I go over here to my search tab, back to search. And earlier that you saw in those TAs, I was saying the index was server verb. And actually, also we said the source type was hypervisor, Zen server, VM. I think that's what I said it was. Okay. So here, what you see that ended up at Splunk, timestamp, name description, name label, platform, all that stuff. There's the UID and all this stuff. So the output of that script, actually I'm going over it all the time. I'm gonna just do this for the last hour. That makes it run a little bit faster. So the output of that script, look, if this is what, each thing right here is what would normally be a log file entry if you're dealing with a log file. So this is how we're getting data into Splunk. Is it making sense? Okay, so that's all we're doing. So this is how we're getting data into Splunk. Some you can do log files. The XenApp, XenDesktop, and Hyper-V use PowerShell. This one uses Python. So these are the scripts. This is what we call scripted input to get information into Splunk. All right? Okay, so that's that. I think that covers everything on getting data in. Let me go back to my agenda to make sure. Getting data in. Okay, so yeah, that's getting data in. And the only one that I haven't covered, because I had to connect back to Aon connected to San Francisco, but I don't want to use that too much to use up Helga's data plan, is doing the...
You can use a couple of hundred megabytes, that's no problem.
Yeah, so the only other one is setting up like NetScaler. So if you go set up NetScaler, you go with the UI, you say syslog forwarding, and you can forward it to a Splunk instance. Christian mentioned earlier this morning also that it has to be readable data. That's only 99% true, because app flow data out of NetScaler is binary, and we can get that as well. But you can set up NetScaler to send the app flow data somewhere as well, which we're picking that up. We just have a piece of code on the Splunk indexer that's decoding that app flow data from binary and turning it into text, so we can index that as well. So.
One question on that. As we all know, the pricing is by volume, by data volume. How is it measured? Do you measure each character and count it as one byte, or how does the volume?
So
how does it work?
We give you kind of rules of thumb on what things are going to be. I'm still working on the science of the XenApp one, because people understand. XenApp administrators know that everything depends on XenApp, so I'll just give you an idea of what I'm working on. This isn't, actually you guys are the only other ones that have seen this besides me, once I show you this.
And everyone else on video.
Well, I've told people at Splunk, so this is what I'm using to do this kind of stuff. So basically, for things like XenDesktop, we say, all right, it's pretty easy to measure. We'll say about 5 to 10 megs per desktop per day. Okay, that's pretty easy to measure. So what I'm doing with XenApp is every source type that XenApp indexes, you can see here there's session, process, application, session. And I've made a sample of what that is by going in there and measuring how big that string was, and then how often you collect the data, how many times that turns into per day. So that means if I'm collecting every 180 seconds, that means I'm collecting this amount of data 480 times a day, which turns into that much megs per day. Then that's the total down here. So then this is just the raw data behind it. So the idea is you say, all right, I'm going to go to one farm with 50 servers, and average process per session is about, say, 10, average session count per day, and then the number of published apps that I have, and it turns into, in this particular case, a little bit, but that's about a 2 gig license at that point.
But what counts is the characters that are printed on the screen.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I have a chatty script, it'll be more.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly.
Likewise, you could reduce the information and then it would be less.
Yes, so the good thing is like the stuff that we're shipping, if you can control how often you collect it, if you want to say, I don't care about it that much, let me only collect that 2 times a day, maybe something that doesn't change very often, that will cut down. Then things like performance, if I don't want to get to every 10 seconds or so on performance collection, turn that down. And then like if somebody has, you're doing EdgeSight and Splunk tomorrow, if somebody has EdgeSight already and they want to continue EdgeSight collecting the performance stuff and just have us collect it stuff that would have tied things together like shared storage and hypervisors and all that, you can cut all the performance stuff out of our stuff and let somebody else collect that. Yeah. So whatever you want to do is totally configurable on how you want to do it. So we're saying out of the box, what we're shipping out of the box on those counts, we're giving you kind of suggestions on how much this is going to be in megabytes per day. So that's how you figure out how much license to buy, or if you need to buy a license. If you're 500 megs or below, yeah, you're good. Okay, make sense?
In terms of the interesting thing in terms of Insight is you could look at more. So Insight, basic model, doesn't let you see all of the information, view all the information. Then with Splunk, you can get access to that.
Yep.
Sorry, access to what?
To information that's not available outside of the basic. So with Splunk, you can get whatever it is you want, whereas with EdgeSight, you've got your basic edition, yes, and then you've got your enterprise edition with all the full stuff in it. What Splunk doesn't prevent you from doing is getting all of that information yourself.
Definitely.
So whatever's scriptable and viewable.
That's the point with my agent, which I'm hoping to
Yeah.
be able to show you quickly later on.
So I guess it's a consequence of the licensing model, really, because you're not licensing on features that you are with it, you license on throughput.
And you don't license on hosts either. With many monitoring solutions, you have to pay for each single host or machine or endpoint, whatever.
It's not all users. So if you consider the EdgeSight licensing, that's on users, isn't it, ultimately? And yes, many more. So like EG Innovations, that's on each individual endpoint. Although what EG told me last night was you can move your licenses around, but that's all just admin and overhead. Here it's just data.
Right. The thing about Splunk is we don't even know what kind of data is coming in. We don't care what kind of data is coming in.
And the license isn't that expensive, is it?
Yes.
Because there's only one type of license.
Yeah.
So what is it?
£6 grand.
The more you buy, the cheaper it gets per gig. So, you're going to start out, that first gig is going to be higher than your second gig. It's a tiered model.
£6 grand's the initial. Let's give you all of the features and not limit you to 500. Then it goes to about gigs or that, yeah.
Yeah, and normally you start out as a gig. Yeah,
And then that's 6.
about 6. Yeah.
Do you have burst licensing?
So yes and no. So burst licensing, the way the licensing works is if something just had like a storm, then it just all kinds of stuff came in. We're just going to warn you. Said, hey, on this day you have a 10 gig license, but on this day 100 gig came in. Don't do that again. We'll warn you the second time. We'll warn you the third time. The fourth time
In a period as well, isn't it?
in a month. The fourth time in a month, we will shut down the search. We will not shut down the indexing. So you can continue to send data in, but we will shut down your ability to see that data. So then you say, I keep going over, instead of having a 10 gig license, I need a 15 gig license. You call up your sales rep, and I need a 15 gig license, and he says, okay, here you go install it on your Splunk server, and then all of a sudden you can see all your data. It still was continuing to come in. So we just turned the visibility of it back on. So you can burst up to 3 times in a month. Then you have to go another month without a license violation, and you say, all right, you're good, you keep going.
So what? I mean, that's not burst licensing. That's.
Well, that's it. It's not. Well, it's not a pay as you go. Now there is, if you are hosting on.
I'm not saying pay as you go, but if you're going to have a massive amount of input.
Yeah.
For a month, and then you're going to go back to your usual. So if you have something that's seasonal, could you say, can I have 100 gig for January, please?
You can work anything out.
That's
not like a list. Yeah, that's not a list thing.
I work for a small software company. I'm aware that the other pricing options are available there.
Yeah, that's not something that there have been plenty of. There's not a list that says. Well, actually, you can get. You can get perpetual license, which means I buy this much, and you can think of it, I buy this many licenses in software subscription after that, or you can actually go on a monthly basis to where you could buy more for a month and then turn around and do something else the next month. So if you do it if you do a non-perpetual license, it's more per gig. But you could do what you're doing, or you work out with your sales rep, and I'm sure that they want to meet great quotas. Yeah. But I mean, something that you were just talking about that I just wanted to give a kind of a quick taste about multiple different types of data. So, you know, we talk about XenApp and EdgeSite, and yeah, we are technically competitive with EdgeSite. What I wanted to show this particular view, this is going into the XenApp app. You know, I put in, you know, user calls in, says something's not working, so I put in my name, and I did this little wizard a minute ago. I didn't know if you saw me doing that, but it got me to this thing. So I put in my username and says, here's the server I'm on. And so something that we're looking at is, I happen to be on this server, BDX86504. This is generated data, so I forgot to get the metrics for that particular server as the server saw. But then what Splunk is doing, it looked up in the server vert index. It says, oh, I found that host name on this hypervisor called BDZen01, and here's what's going on that hypervisor. So I can go over here and grab some graphs about that hypervisor and see some information, or click this link and go drill down into a totally different app about that hypervisor, so get some information that way. But then also, it says, I know the host name that you're on, I know the hypervisor you're on, so I figured out which storage volume you're on the NetApp. So we have NetApp data coming in here, and here's your read and write latency on the controller on that NetApp. If I was coming in via NetScaler, it would have showed me NetScaler here as well. And actually, I took it back out for demo purposes, but we're running these physical hosts on UCS hardware, so I can give you the errors and faults on UCS blade that you're on as well. So it's tying all that stuff together in one pane of glass here.
So you've mentioned apps there.
Yep.
So apps is software to view the particular data.
Well, it's the set of TAs that with the stuff that I was showing you, the TA for XenServer and Hyper-V.
But that's a collection.
Yes.
What you've got here is, this is a view.
Yes, and all of it's considered an app.
Okay.
So when I ship you an app, I ship you the TAs that you need to collect the information,
Yeah.
as well as all the views to look at the information. All of it's open source and free. You can say, I don't like that view, and I can just get it out, or that's almost what I wanted, let me go modify it. Same thing with the collection of data. It's like, you're not collecting this, let me go add to what you were collecting, so I'll make sure that I collect, I don't know, BIOS or something like that. You want to grab that I'm not collecting here. So you can do all that. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So when I'm shipping an app, what I was showing you over here, I was showing you the server vert app. It has some TAs that go with server vert. There's the Hyper-V and the XenServer, and then the app is all the views that go along with it, on top of the data.
In your searches, you can also search for stuff that's not there.
Yes.
Which I thought was very neat, especially from a security troubleshooting point of view. So maybe the users come in remotely, maybe they've authenticated with their SMS, passcode, two-factor authentication,
Yes.
but they can't launch an application. See what I did? That's useful.
All right.
Because I get asked for remote access. Tell me all the people who failed to log on but didn't launch a XenApp app.
Yep.
So that then people can start considering, is the service under attack, or someone's trying to log in? You can do that with Splunk. I've not found a tool that will allow that, because you can't do the search for something that's not there. Tell me about the stuff that I don't know about.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you can.
Yes. Yes, you can. Okay.
I think it's a great idea to make it open source. That if there's a need anywhere in the world.
Well, it's not to say that Splunk's open source, but be careful.
Yeah, Splunk is
No,
not
the
open
app.
source. The app is
I think the app.
But there's actually been some articles written, Splunk, the open source thing. It's like, it's not open source.
No. I understood it that way. If there needs to get something from the data, so you build an app around and these TAs, and then so if there's anything useful, and there's a guy who makes this, and then everybody can use it.
Do you have a community dev page?
Yes. Yeah, we call it Splunk Base. So it's almost like it's like an Apple store or something. So there's Splunk Base. This is where we have our community for questions, but this is also, see, there's the yellow, that's Hadoop little guy right there. So this is where you can go download your apps or find answers. So if I want to go download an app, I can click here on, here's all the different apps that we have. So there's Splunk for Windows, Unix, and Linux, Google Maps, this thing called Side View, that's third-party stuff. Here's recent stuff that's come on, Windows, technology, Splunk Asset Discovery, Splunk on Splunk. And here's all our officially supported Splunk apps. If you call in for support, they'll support you. But a lot of these apps are not, they're saying, you know, this is by Splunk, this is by this guy's Carasso, this is by this guy MW, this is by
You already got one.
I have not got one. He had one and he's finished it.
Yeah.
Anyway, move on.
So anyway, right here, these uploads,
Yeah.
Splunk uploads here, but other people upload here too. So this is just the community place where people upload their apps.
Well, I was going to say there's a similar concept for EdSite. There are sites where you can upload EdSite reports.
Right.
But the complexity of creating that report is such that there are few people putting up information. So, in theory, EdSite's nice because you can create a report with SQL.
Yes, it's all SQL Server reporting services.
But it's all SQL Server reporting services, and not everyone's completely au fait with that.
Right.
And you've got to understand the whole model, the data model that we've got.
Yes.
So you find that it's very difficult to share information and to get new views of data, new ideas.
Right.
Well, that's within EdSite because you can do it with crystal reports or other.
Well, now you've got to buy a whole other tool, do a whole other stuff. Here, I just need Notepad. Yeah.
Yeah, I have no
But you
problem
can-
with this, but
Yeah.
but
Do
the
that.
Good.
no,
But-
yeah,
all
but the you can still get some of the information from EdSite. This is
Yeah.
much more. This is not comparable to EdSite, I would say.
So Splunk feels much more like a platform
Yeah.
than
Yes, you got it.
yeah.
Yes, it's a platform. And the apps sit on, I mean, Splunk by itself, you can do even the search that I was showing you earlier is an app. So you need apps. This is what we're looking at here. This is called the search app. So this is the default app that comes in it, but you need some app to look at your data. So even this search that comes default with Splunk is an app, which we're about to get into. I don't know how much time I have even left, but we'll get into some, actually doing some searching, and then, you know, how to turn those searches into an app that you can then upload to Splunk yourself if you wanted to. But yeah, so this is an app that's looking at data, and then you can correlate data from different things. So yeah, EdgeSite is, I've never had a problem with the EdgeSite database, the amount of data that is in there. I think it's great. I just haven't really liked the reports that come out of the box. And then there is a learning curve either way with doing Splunk or doing an EdgeSite report as well. So, I mean, I knew reporting services before I ever knew EdgeSite. And then probably a similar learning curve to learning some of the Splunk search language, because there is a lot to the Splunk search language that you can do. It's just, I can correlate different types of data with this. It doesn't matter what kind of data is in
can you look into real applications or applications installed in Senap or NVIDIA to read anything out from them?
So if that application, you can have, if the application is producing a log file, we can say, monitor that log file. That's not a problem. There's actually, Splunk is relatively new into this type of environment, just in the past 2 or 3 years getting into this type of crowd. It's been around for a while, and even there's a whole developer community where developers are doing semantic logging within their applications and then using Splunk to see what's going on with their applications as well. That has nothing to do with the industry we're in, but they're using that for application development as well. So yeah, if your app is producing a log file, then sure, no problem. Or if you want to go, if it's producing anything that's text data, then Splunk can read it. Go on with it. Okay. So we kind of jumped around there a little bit. I wanted to circle back around and get into, we got data in and we looked at some of the results of the data, but I want to start doing some of the simple searching of data to show you what you can do now that you have data inside Splunk. All right, you guys ready? You need a break? You good?
Good.
Good? All right. All right, so now, here we are. This is the default user experience out of Splunk. And so again, just like when I was telling you, I first installed Splunk and then I clicked on the thing that said search and I got this, and again, I'm like, what do you do? This isn't real intuitive on what you do here. What's showing you right here is you're looking at your sources, which we know now what a source is the source of data coming in. Your source types, which again, you saw where the source types come from, and then your host, that's just what sent the data over to you. So that's basically where your universal forwarder is running, or where you want to go get data, or if it's coming in via UDP, what sent it to you. All right, so let's just talk about, we'll talk about some XenApp data. So, something that is cool here is if I didn't do anything here and I just type the word error, it will go look for all my data. Let me turn it down from all time. I'll just do the past 60 minutes. It'll go look at all my data in my in all my indexes and find anything with the word error in it and highlight it for me right here. So it's showing you all the type of stuff. I have a couple of source types. There's a one event log and a perfmon on storage for Hyper-V that are showing me some error coming from one host. So it looks like BD-02 is giving me some error. So all I did was type error there. Just like if I was at Google and I typed error, it would go out and find stuff with errors for me. But I mean, this is a lot of data. So if we just really want to drill down on XenApp data, I can say index equals XenApp. And so what I'm telling Splunk to do now is throw out all that other data. I had hypervisor data in there, I had NetApp data in there, I had NetScaler data in there. So now I'm telling Splunk I just care about what's in my XenApp index. So think of an index kind of like a database on a database server. So I'm just telling Splunk, give me all my XenApp data. And so here's what it is. Again, a bunch of log files. Here's a thing for server load. That's if you did a qfarm/load on the command line, this is what you would get. This is all stuff about an ICA session that has all your bandwidth stuff that you're using and ICA latency. Here's a session process here. That's another session process, so on and so forth. So here's a bunch of stuff that got returned from XenApp. And you'll also notice as you start typing along here, you have this search assistant here. So it can give you some matching things, some matching terms. It can even give you suggestions on the commands that you're using. So also what's happening with Splunk is, remember I said that there's no schema to Splunk. So what Splunk is doing right now is looking at all this data that got returned, all this text data here, and it's looking at it and it says, I found these interesting fields for you. So this is all done in real time as we're searching the data. And something that makes a field interesting is it occurs quite a bit. So we found this thing called account display name that occurred in a lot of the events, and here's 3 of the values. I mean, here's the top. By default, it'll show you the top 10, but it only has 3. So there's Brandon, there's me, and there's this guy named Tom that are using this data. And it says, all right, I found some other, different types of things, and I found these source types in the XenApp stuff. You notice there's some that say 6.5 here and some that say 6.0 here because we have 6.5 and 6.0 data coming in here. I don't have a 5.0 farm coming in here right now with this generated data. So it's getting all that stuff. So let's say that I'm really just interested in, session data. So I can come over here and I can say I want to look at stuff for a session. So I click that and it'll add that to the search line for me. So it just keeps adding stuff for me. And then wildcards are supported. So if I wanted any kind of session data, I could do an asterisk there. So I could do 6.0 or 6.5. So that would come in. So that's not a problem. And so what's going on is I'm drilling down farther and farther into my data. So here's all the output for log entries, these are from scripts, that are showing me stuff about session data. And so I find this thing, here's server name, I'm finding the servers that are hosting these sessions, and you can get the log on times for these sessions if I wanted to graph out the login times by a user or something like that, no problem, you can do that. I just found one farm name here, so it's finding all that stuff for me. So maybe now I want to chart out, I'll do a time chart by login time since we were just looking at, I'm making this stuff on the cup here, I hope it works. I want to do maybe a time chart. So you notice I did the little pipe character right there. So what I'm taking all this information that Splunk returned, so that's kind of narrowing it down. Now I say I want to do something with that information. So I'm going to pipe it into another Splunk command. And this is where the learning curve starts to come in, is that you have to know the Splunk search language to do this stuff. It will start to give you, Splunk will start to give you some suggestions. So it says, here's some things you can do, time chart, and some things. Here's an average load by server name. That actually, that sounds pretty good. So I can just type that. Sure, that sounds great. So I don't have any. Well, I'm not. Maybe if I adjust to 4 hours, see if I get any data there. No. So.
Called session, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It'd be server load. I think that's the source type. I'm not getting any values there. Like I said, I'm making this tough up as I'm going here. Oh, there's some data there. So since I use that time chart command, by default everything is showing you kind of this list view, but since I use that time chart command, I can use this thing right here, this chart. And again, this is generated data. This is not real-time data because that would take too long coming from California. So it's showing me some time chart data. Here's the average server load by server name. So, and it's a time chart. And you'll see there's some missing values here. You can say, what do I want to do with those missing values? Right here is omit. I could treat them as 0 and it would just drop it down. Treat those as 0, or I can just say connect them.
That would be faking it.
Yeah. So,
That's
yeah.
better.
So it's up to you what you want to do. So if you wanted to admit it, that means there's no data there. And so, I mean, and then you can, if I don't want to have a line chart, maybe I want to have a column chart, you can do that. Or if I wanted to have an area chart, you can do that. Whatever you want to do, but line chart look pretty good. So what we're doing here is we're using Splunk to chart some stuff. So as we start going into this search language, you come up with these things that could technically be dashboard panels. So this chart would be something that's very interesting to a CIO. So what I can do here now is that I want to create a nice a dashboard panel out of this. So what's going to happen here is this, you say name the search because it's going to look at what I did here, the search that I did, and I'm going to name the search. I'm going to call this server load. And then if by default it looks for the time range that I just did. So the time range in Splunk, you say the -4 hours on the hour is what that means. If I want to do just the past day, I could do -1 day on the day, because -1 day would be basically 24 hours, but if I wanted to snap it to actually midnight to now, I could do that. So I click next, and I'll just create a new dashboard, we call it E2E dashboard, and click next. And then by default it remembers that I did the line before, and then click finish. And what Splunk is doing right now, it just created a nice dashboard for me with that graph as the panel, as the first panel on here. So if I kept doing this type of stuff, I could add more panels, and then everything's here is nice, nice and pretty and sizable. And I said, I really don't like that. I want to edit it, and I want to edit the visualization and make it a instead of a line, I want to do a bar after all. Save that, and now it's a nice bar chart for me instead of the line. Or I still don't like that. Maybe I wanted some other thing, maybe a column. You can do that here as well. So you can start modifying things here, and then say all. So I'm done editing. And so at this point, I made a nice, pretty graph here, and it has the mouse over events. I could go turn it into a drill down. If I want to do, by default, it's just going to run that search for that particular value, which doesn't give you much. So, but you can control what those drill downs do, and so I could give this this URL here to manager, and they could go do their stuff. And again, like I said earlier, if I wanted to schedule a PDF delivery, I can do that with if I had the email settings and all that kind of good stuff. Does that make sense? I think we're running out of time here, but I think I got to 5 or something like that. Anybody know how long I have?
Yeah, officially till 5. Yeah.
Okay, good. I want to give you some time too. So searching, so you can do searching. While I was doing some of the correlating searches, like when I showed you that Zen app, we can do some searching and you can get into some really some advanced, what we call sub-searching. I don't have a lot of time to step through all of it. Oh yeah, I do want to show you this though. So, yeah, I need to show you these two things. So what I wanted to show you with this one is, I'm going to run a search now that says, that says index equals ZenApp. My source type equals session process. The earliest, 1 day at the day, the latest is now. I'm going to dedupe the session ID because by default it'll show me all the processes and it's going to be this, the session ID is going to be over and over and over. So I'm just going to dedupe that. That's, I'm taking some stuff. Now I'm taking it into command to do something with it. Then I want to give me the stats. I want to go to count by server name to how many sessions for each server. And then I'm going to say I want to find the ones where the count is greater than 1. So here's what we get.
Thank you, Alex.
So the reason I'm showing you this search is so here's all my servers with the count of more than 1 session. So this could be useful if I was like I needed to know anytime the session count was above 50 or 100 or something like that. So you have some SLA in your environment, right? So I could run this search every now and then to go figure this out to say how many users or sessions per server, or I can have Splunk do this for me, and I can create, like I did the dashboard panel earlier, I can create an alert. And so what is going to happen, I'll say sessions, and what's going to happen is it says, all right, I'm going to take this search that you just did and turn it into alert. So I can say if I wanted to send an email, run a script, I can show it as triggered in the alerts manager, which I'll show you what that looks like when we get down here. And so I'll just say I want to send an email, and here's all your stuff that you could do with it. Actually, I'll just show it as triggered in the alert manager. It has medium severity since I don't have email set up on this local instance. Click next, and then what happened just now is when I click finish, Splunk is going to run that that query in real time, and anytime this condition happens, it will let me know. So I can set up alerts that way. So an alert is just a search. Basically everything in Splunk is just a search. So this is a pretty simple search, but you could have a really complex search that goes over multiple tiers in your environment as well. So if a server is experiencing high CPU and the hypervisor that it's on is also experiencing high CPU, and there's more than 10 VMs running on it, then send me an alert saying I have a high load of CPUs and it's causing pain on the VMs or something like that. So you could set up that where it's a multiple tier search as well, and then let you know. And like I did just on the alerts index, let's see, go to a different app. We'll go to all. So this is by default a view that comes out of the box of Splunk. It'll just show you for all the alerts that you have set up. They'll add their, if they fired, they'll add it over here, and you can see the results of that particular alert. So if we go to this, let's use your experience alert here. All right. So that makes sense on setting up alerts.
When you set up alerts and you says run a script, can that be run another search?
If you run a script that runs another search, you could. What would you do with that?
It's kind of should
Yeah. So mainly the script is if you know that something needs to get redone, like I don't know, just pulling something out. But if you see an error 503 in your web server to do an IIS reset, you have a script that did that part. Okay. So that's alerting.
Why don't you just put it in one search?
Yeah, seriously, man. All right, so that's alerting. The other thing that I wanted to show you is something called lookup. Okay, so this is another one we're doing in ZenApp. All right, so we're doing session here, and something that is really kind of weird is, what is it called? It's the client product ID. Okay. So also, I mean, here's just another quick thing. We'll just do a table. So we'd say take all our data and we'll turn it into a table with the username and client product ID, I think is what it was. Is that what it was? Yeah. Okay. So what this, again, let me turn it off of all time. We'll get out over here. All right, so what this is, and we can dedupe the username. We see the same usernames showing up. Do the username. So I'm taking some.
Is it going to work?
That's not going to work at all, is it? I get my fat fingers to work. So what we're telling Splunk to do is say, give me all the session data. Just show me unique usernames, and then I'm going to create a table with the username and the client product ID. Well, the client product ID, anybody know what that is? The thing about that's an enumeration that will tell you the type of client device, whether it's iOS or Windows or Mac or whatever. So that really stinks, right? That doesn't tell you much. Cogner used client product ID 82. So you just have to know that that's a Mac, or that TUEast used client product ID number 1. You just have to know that's Windows. That really stinks, right? So what we can do is we can set up lookups to look up this thing somewhere else. So I just happen to have, thanks to Citrix, I have this client product ID table, which is, let's see, that's in out, lookups, where is it? ICA by type. Okay, so we have client product ID, and you have all the numbers. These are the enumerations, and these are the actual values. So I can tell Splunk, whenever you see that, rather than show me 82, show me Mac. And of course, this is a lookup table that is, again, open source and text. I could say, I hate Mac if I wanted to put there, whatever. You could. That's just whatever you want to do. So we're doing a key off of this and going to show you that. So if I take up what I did over here,
What's internet?
I don't know.
It's cool, huh? Internet.
That's
The rest.
That's Citrix. I don't know.
HTML5.
Yeah. Oops. Let me grab the lookup here so I don't have to type it now.
We don't know yet what it will be, but we will use the number 2.
So we can also do, you can do lookups to AD as well. It doesn't just have to be text files.
Does not have to be text files. I'm just having, for really small things like this that change very, very little, a text file is desirable. Let's do this lookup here.
Because what's hard in bedside is linking AD information to reports. Unless you rewrite all the reports in the report server. So maybe you want to see which groups of users are using the service and applications.
Right.
Or maybe you want to link up their site information, so you want to be able to know which remote users from which sites are coming in whenever. And you can do that with the groups.
Yep.
Whereas with Edside, you can start editing reports.
Yeah. So here, I have, is using this particular time range was using a client ID 1. So there's Windows, Mac. If I change that lookup table, it would be whatever I put there. Now lookups, I was using this lookup right here in the command line here, but you can also tell Splunk based on source type to do an automatic lookup. So this, I have this device type right here. If I had this doing automatic through Splunk, the device type would show up here in the list of fields automatically, even though device type, there's no such thing in the event that showed up here. And that's all done through Manager as well, which we come over here, if we look at Manager, we have this thing for lookups. And then you have the lookup table files, that's where we define the different files that we're using. So we have the same thing for license, because there's a cryptic code for license that's not very human readable, so we have that thing. And then on the lookups, you have over here where you can do automatic lookups. And so I have one for this zone thing, but over here, if I wanted to do some automatic lookup, I could say based on the source type, if I saw session, always look for a field called client device ID, go look it up in this table, and then device ID would show up in my list of available fields, so it always would be there without having to do this manual lookup. The only caveat to that is if you're running tons and tons of searches on that and you don't necessarily want to always look up that means it's always going to look it up and always hit that disk to go look it up if it's looking it up on disk. You can also have lookups do what's called scripted lookups. So if you wanted to go to, you can do AD if you wanted to with a script, but we have what's called an LDAP search to where you can have LDAP go straight into there as a custom command and say go look in Active Directory to find more information about this user from Active Directory. Or mostly where I use the scripted lookups is if I want to go grab information out of another database somewhere to populate more information into my search results. So I can go do that, or you can go call a web service if you need to call a web service, whatever you want to do to add more lookup data to your information. Just keeping in mind that it's not in, you can't search on it though. So if I go search for device type equals Windows, that's not going to show up because that's just a lookup. It doesn't index that information. That's not in its index. That's just that you can only look up product ID equals 1. I had to know, I mean, that lookup that's not in the Splunk index. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So the last thing I'll show you on searching data is what we call a sub-search. So let me find a good one here. We'll do this one. Oh, by the way, this is what a dashboard looks like. This is called advanced XML. There's something called simple XML as well that actually we'll be getting more onto that. Everything, all the views in Splunk are XML files. And this, I said everything is open source. If you go look at the source, and also by the way, if you see a dashboard that you like, you can go open the source on the file, but you could also, let me go to one. If I wanted to see just real quickly how something was done, that's the one down there, sorry. Go to the local one. So I very quickly want to look at how it's done. I could do a question mark, show source equals true, and it'll show me the tree of all the modules that were used to make that view. Then it actually shows you the source down here, all the XML that was used to make that view. And that's a pretty extensive view. We're not going to have time to go over all of that. But you can look at it really quickly there, but this is all in the file system too if you want to just go look at it. So the thing behind all the views is that XML. So XA user. Okay. So this particular view that I already showed you earlier, I go to the right place. This particular thing I was showing you earlier with all the drill down and stuff, I'll show you how this thing figured out that it was on this particular server here. All right. So what we're looking at here is the source code for, I call it, it's not even code, it's just XML. This is the source for that view. And so down here, I just happen to know where it is because I know. Here's where I'm doing the hypervisor stuff. So what I'm going to show you now is what's called a sub-search. Let's copy and paste that over here. And you can go as many levels as you want on sub-search. Here. Okay, so let's explain what's going on here. All right, so I haven't told you what event types are, but that's just really shorthand for giving you an index and a source type together. So I call this an event type server vert performance asterisk host processor. So what I'm doing is I'm looking for any hypervisor performance data, and it doesn't matter what type. It could be Hyper-V or Gen server. And then processor. And then I'm looking for a counter percent processor time. The instance is total. And then here's where the sub search comes in. You can't see it back here, but it's this square bracket here and a square bracket here. So what I'm telling Splunk to do is, before and earlier in this dashboard, I had, let me go back to this. So earlier in this dashboard, I had the server name here, and that's all I had. So to be able to correlate that server name, I'm looking it up in the server vert index. So what Splunk is doing here is says, I want all the performance information, or the processor performance information about a hypervisor. And then the sub search tells me which one I want. So I'm saying, go look for a VM named this, BDXA6504, and return me the host that it's on. And just by default, if you just ran this search right here, it would return every record. So I'd just say, just give me the first one you find. It'll have the host name. And then it expects it to be named hype host instead of VM host. So I said, just give me the VM host, rename it as hype host, because that's what this search expects. And so what this is doing right here is saying, give me the performance information for whatever was returned by this search, and then here's all the values that I want from it. So I'm able to take that, that host name right here, look it up in the server virtualization index, and get the performance information about the host that it was running on. So if I click enter there, it says, here's the things that came back. I told it which fields, because by default it will return all the fields. If you use that fields command, it'll just return back the ones that you wanted here. This helps with processing time, speeds up your searches. And so it found this hype host name called BDZen01. That's the hypervisor host that it's running on, and it gives me all the processing information about that host that I could then turn in. What I'm doing over here is turning it into a nice little chart here for the processor time. So it's 1.8%. You see, it's really low. And if it did not return anything, if I was looking at BD01, which is not a virtual server, it just returned nothing. So it didn't find that. So conversely, if you notice this whole panel right here, if that panel like this, we had that BDZen01 because it found that host 04, or I found this VM called 04. If I change this to 01 right here, you'll notice, keep an eye on this right here. This, that goes away because it couldn't find that host on a virtual server. So that whole thing just goes away.
Sorry? Can you come to an end because we need a room?
Okay. Helga.
We're trying to protect you from Alex. He's threatening something with fists, violence,
Oh,
meetings.
I got 9 more minutes.
No.
At least.
No.
I don't.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yeah.
Look at the plan here.
Yeah, I always find that agenda to be
So we got 9 more minutes and then
Very
change.
flexible.
Very flexible. Yeah. All right. So that's
Give him 9 more minutes.
that's searching. That's getting data in. And like I said, Splunk is about. We go gather some information, like you saw with the TAs, but Splunk is really about analyzing data that something produces. So Helga over here is creating this really cool thing that produces a lot of data called Uber Agent. And I'm going to go ahead, you can go ahead and come on up here. Show it.
Yeah. Can you click the
yeah.
email Brandon sent?
Yeah.
Because it's a VPN, I cannot access it.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you had something on your machine or not. Let's see.
So as you've seen, Brandon is Splunk is a great tool for working with data, visualizing data, searching data. But what you need is obviously a data source. So for various systems, there are various ways to get data into Splunk. With Windows, the agent you get with Splunk is somewhat limited. So Brandon actually contacted me and asked me if I was interested in developing an agent that could gather more detailed system information. So I've been I've started developing my own Splunk agent. It's called Uber Agent, for now at least. And right now it does two things already very well. It collects very detailed logon data, logon statistics, like total logon duration, profile load time, various group policy statistics like registry application time, photo redirection, processing time, stuff like that. That's one big thing that I have in it right now. The second one is it gathers detailed data about processes like IOs, memory usage, CPU usage, stuff like that. And also not only process data, but also application data. So it determines automatically to which application a process belongs. So it sees, for example, Excel.exe, and it determines that Excel belongs to the application Microsoft Office. So it sums up all those performance data per application. So in many cases you have dozens of processes belonging to an application. So it's more interesting to have application-related data than process-related data.
Does it time individual group policies as well?
Right now, not. But the status is like this, and it's currently in kind of an alpha stage. And I'm hoping to have a beta ready by the beginning of next year. And I'm actually looking for beta customers that would get a very interesting price. So it will be a paid beta program, but you will get a very interesting price. And of course, if you are a beta customer, you have the possibility to influence what goes into the product. So I didn't have a chance to look at what has been happening here.
Brandon did these while we were traveling. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So here's some login times in milliseconds, but also, like you were saying, there's the group policy processing time that he's looking here. Like he did some averages and some. Here's probably some details.
If I could explain this, because these are the login detailed login data. Total login time, it's all in milliseconds. How long did it take to load the user profile? How long did it take for the shell to start up? In other words, Explorer and auto runs and stuff like that. How long did it take to execute the Active Directory login script? How long did it take to for the domain controller discovery, which is a good indication if your DNS and AD is set up properly or not. Group policy processing time. And is it possible to scroll to the right? There should be more. And here are the various CSE, the group policy, individual group policy components. It only shows what actually is getting applied. So if you have folder redirection, you get data on it. Apparently Brandon didn't have folder redirection, he had just the default registry policies. So, do you have another one where it shows process or application performance?
Like here's
the total log on time. I always have to discuss with customers because if you time it with a stopwatch, it's completely different from what you measure.
Just working. So sorry, we could maybe discuss it later on because we don't have much time left. Just hoping to be able to show you the application performance data. Is that from Uber Agent?
This is all from Uber Agent.
That's what Brandon did with it. I haven't seen that. So what you can see per process here is disk I/O, memory, CPU in percent, and Uber Agent also calculates all the data per application, not only per process. So I'm not sure if Brandon has it on some page.
So you can aggregate individual processes together to say your app X takes up.
And to sessions also. It tells you which session uses which resources. So you can identify users that
Their workflow is resource heavy.
For example, yes.
So this gives a far greater granularity than any other Zen app monitoring process that I've seen.
Thanks. And I'm only just started.
Yeah.
So, just implemented a eccentric service where they suggest that they can do some of this, but not to this level of detail, and their process aggregation isn't always reliable. Insight can do a little bit of it, but not with that being able to link processes together, and you've got no ability to search against other things. So, if you've run out of time and other people wanted to see that, by all means you can tag on to the session tomorrow on Insight versus Zen, because this is the type of detail that makes a difference when deciding servers. So to have this level of detail in terms of planning for a new box, working out whether VMs or maybe some sort of ILO solution is going to make a difference. Having this type of information would be very, very good.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, and I'm just getting started with developing for Splunk.
Just release that now.
Well, it's I'm moving quite quickly, so I'm looking at having a beta ready early next year. That's only 2 months left.
So what was interesting there was the product and the customers. So that suggests a value and a cost to that, or so is that going to be the case? Because whenever we've listened to the TAs originally, it was, this is for free, you can download it.
No, this is going to be a paid product.
Yeah. We will say you need much more level of detail. Talk to Helga.
Right, I see. And then that's a, I suppose that's a capacity for any other TA. So all the ones that you've got.
You could create an app and sell it alongside.
Yes, I will create a Splunk app to nicely represent the data.
Right. But what's producing the data is sealed binary.
Right.
So
there you go. That's the clever part. Right. So you, within any Splunk app, you can call something, and that could be a script. It could be a PowerShell script, or it could be an executable.
We saw
or
those
it could
earlier,
be an executable.
Right.
Yes.
So for instance, that product ID, I wrote an executable to pull that because that was not exposed, and you had to go in WF API and write an executable to pull that out. We give it away because we're Splunk, but
how can he surprise you?
Yeah, he needs to.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, just to give you a quick, I mean, this is the raw data that Uber Agent's producing. So I mean, Splunk itself, and Brandon did these, like literally he just did these yesterday, and just throwing together some graphs is relatively easy. But the level of detail that Helga's giving us into the inside of the operating system.
Insight will give you your logon time is long.
Yeah.
So your logon time used to be 5 seconds, now it's 20 seconds.
Yep.
And you go, oh, got a problem with my logons.
He'll tell you
The
why.
users already are telling you you've got a problem with your logons. You don't
Yeah.
get it. But what Helga's app has done do is go, actually, you've introduced your server in the wrong structure, so it's going to the wrong DC.
Well,
that's what
DC discovery indicates the problem with DNS.
Get them off. Or you modify, or your group policy now has taken a long time. Just change what that is. And if you can stick a value on that, if you start putting cost items on that, you could work out whether or not introducing res or absence has actually saved them or generated them.
Yep. All right. Appreciate it, guys. We're going to kick out.
Thank you.